with the priority of the future administration. If the future administration is or will follow the national interest, and if they think that the national interest will be to stabilize the situation within the country, not to bet on migration, but to consolidate the society within the United States, to amend the mistakes that led to tremendous debt and inflation within the US, then, naturally, following the domestic national interests, if they would follow them, then they would pursue the goals of global liberalism that I think is destroyed by the United States from the inside. Well, they strive to be the leader of the global liberalism. Well, no. But if they follow the national interest, then maybe there could be some changes in the foreign policy towards Russia and towards the conflict in Ukraine. But remember how many ifs I mentioned. In that case, some changes are possible. But I think you would agree with me that no one is interested in the United States, in Ukraine. They're interested in the magnificence, in the supremacy and leadership of the United States in the world. And they don't want to allow any kind of success by Russia. Indeed, because they believe that in that case, that will be detrimental to the US leadership. That's the whole point of what the US is doing. But if the future administration changes the priorities for itself, they would set the goals differently, and they would see the essence of their work in strengthening the United States from the inside, finance, economy, building normal relations in the world, more respectful towards everyone, then something may change. I think that it depends on the sentiment in the society. And I think that the sentiment is shifting to that end. And I think that if the future administration will catch that wind in their sails, then the change is possible.
Спасибо, госпожа Мак.
Thank you, Madam Nicole. Now I give the floor to the men. Now I'd like to ask my question to President. Now I'd have to give the floor to Vugar Aliyev, the chair of Azertaj. Please, you have the floor. Mr. Putin, thank you for the time that you're giving us. Today, the relations between Azerbaijan and Russia are developing in an upward trend, and recent visit of President Aliyev to Moscow gave a chance not only to celebrate a memorable anniversary, 50 years of the bomb railroad, but also to discuss bilateral relations. What's your take on the future outlook for bilateral cooperation, and in particular the development of the transportation corridor north-south?
Our relations are developing successfully, reliably, and in a pragmatic fashion. You know, we feel the stance of Azerbaijan, which is building our interstate relations based on mutual interests. And also there is an element of mutual sympathy, because otherwise it wouldn't be possible to explain the presence of 300 schools in Russian language in Azerbaijan. Children are being taught in Russian, and I know that President Aliyev is fully supporting the study of the Russian language in Azerbaijan, and we can see that in all aspects, in all spheres, which tells us that the leadership of Azerbaijan believes that the Russian language is going to be something the Azeri citizens are going to need, and they will need that language for further developing our bilateral ties, which are developing. Our trade stands at 4.5, 4.6 billion US dollars, and the pace of this development is very good, very steady, and we are increasingly diversifying our relations. I'm confident that should we manage to preserve these good intentions on both sides, and in Russia we share those intentions, then the outcomes are going to be great. Of course, there's still a lot that needs to be done, and you are absolutely correct in saying that we need to further develop the logistics, not just the north-south corridor, but also there are other dimensions to that, such as setting up logistics hubs at the Azeri-Russian border, at the Dagestan stretch where the works are currently underway. It also applies to other directions. We have quite a big number of students studying at Russian universities, receiving scholarships from the budget, and we see there is a very big interest in receiving further education. As far as that north-south corridor is concerned, it can turn into an international route which is in high demand, because right from here, cargo, and shipments from the port of St. Petersburg can flow through the European part of Russia, then on to Azerbaijan, and then onwards to the coast of the Gulf. Maybe 10 days or so faster than if they were to go through the Suez Canal. We are not saying anything bad about the Suez Canal. It's very good for the world trade, but this new trade would be an additional route, a very good one for shipping goods from the north to the south and vice versa. 10 days faster. This will help us save a lot. This is a very good route, but still there is a lot that needs to be done. We're working on both sides. I am aware that President Aliyev supports this project. We've spoken with him about that on many occasions. The leadership of Iran is also in support of this project, and since this project promises to be very beneficial, there are other foreign investors that have expressed their interest in that route, not regional investors, investors from other say the wealth funds, sovereign wealth funds of the Arab countries, because they're always searching for a possibility to invest money in reliable endeavors. There are still issues that need to be studied further, in particular what stretches and where and how they're going to be funded. Is it going to be based on loan, or there's going to be direct funding from Russia? How this is going to fit with the streams that are going to head westwards across the territory of Azerbaijan. We need to finalize some issues with our Iranian friends and partners, or whether it's going to be a narrow gauge or a wide gauge road. I mean, the one that's going to be built on the territory of Iran. But the crux of the matter is, everyone is determined to implement this project we've set up. The directorate, VTB, is the organization responsible for that. I'm confident that we will complete this project. Well, it's going to take some time. There are some issues about funding, but this is not the only project we are pursuing together. Apart from that, Azerbaijan is a Caspian state. It's one of the 5 Caspian states, and that means that we've got many joint interests. Some apply to the environment of the Caspian Sea. Thank you, Mr. Aliyev. And now I'd like to give the floor to a state you will never be indifferent to, and that's Germany. We've got Martin Romanchik, head of news of DPA. He knows from first hands about our country, because in the 90s he worked as a correspondent in Moscow. Over to you, sir.
Präsident, vielen Dank für die Einladung.
Good evening, Mr. President. Good evening, everyone. Chancellor Olaf Scholz. has agreed to provide weapons to Ukraine. If Chancellor were to change his opinion, what would your stance be then? And what do you think the future of Germany is going to be? Have you made any threats or any warnings to Chancellor when he made the decision to provide weapons to Ukraine? Well, we never threaten anyone, especially if that means threatening the head of another country, because that would be just bad form. We have different positions on different matters. We are aware of the position European countries have taken, and in particular taken by Germany with regard to the developments in Ukraine. Everyone thinks that it was Russia that had started the war in Ukraine. But I would like to underscore that no one in the West, in Europe, wants to remember how this tragedy had started, and it started with a coup d'etat, an anti-constitutional coup d'etat that happened in Ukraine. That's the origin of the war. Is it Russia that is to blame for that coup d'etat? No, it's not. And have those that are trying to accuse Russia forgotten that the foreign ministers of Poland, Germany and France came to Kiev and put their signature to a document aimed at settling the political crisis. They put that signature to the document as guarantors that the crisis would be resolved in a peaceful constitutional manner. Europe, and in particular France and Germany, prefer to leave it out. And if they were to remember that, then the question would arise, why did the European countries and Germany and France as guarantors in particular have not demanded that the Ukrainian leadership should get back to the legal field, as it were? Why have they ignored their responsibilities as the guarantors of those agreements that have been reached? They're the ones to blame. They are guilty of what has transpired alongside with those forces, the US, that provoked the anti-constitutional coup d'etat. This was followed by the desire of the citizens of Crimea to withdraw from Ukraine. Then it was succeeded by the decision of the people of Donbass not to submit to those who had supported the coup d'etat. That's the origin of the conflict. Afterwards, Russia has made every effort to arrive at a formula that would allow to peacefully resolve that conflict. In 2015, Minsk saw the signing of the so-called Minsk agreements. And incidentally, these agreements were endorsed by a decision of the UN Security Council. It's a document that should have been implemented, but it has not been. Instead, a choice was made in favor of addressing that matter in a military manner. Artillery and armed forces started to be used against the civilians in the east of Ukraine. For some reason, in the West, and in Germany, in France, in other countries, no one wants to remember that. So we facilitated the signing of the Minsk agreements, but it turns out that no one intended to observe the agreements. And the former Chancellor of Germany, former President of France, have said that publicly. Mr. Romanchik, what am I supposed to make of that? They have made public statements that they had never intended to observe the Minsk agreements. They only signed them to rearm Ukraine and to create a favorable environment for the continuation of hostilities. So they were simply duped. What other explanation could there be to that? For 8 years, we've been pursuing a peaceful solution to this issue. 8 years. Some time ago, the former chancellor told me, in Kosovo, yes, NATO had acted without the decision of the UN Security Council, but 8 years blood had been spilled in Kosovo, she said to me. And what about this particular case, when the blood of Russian people was being spilled in the east of Ukraine, in Donbass? Is it not blood? Is it water? For some reason, no one wanted to pay any attention to that. In the end, we were forced to act when the then Ukrainian authorities declared that they were happy with none of the points of the Minsk agreements, and the foreign minister declared that they were not gonna observe the Minsk agreements. That 8 years ago, there was a constant degradation of economy and in human rights. In Donbass, people were killed. So we were forced to recognize their independence. It took us 8 years to do that. We were hoping that we would find a peaceful solution. It was 8 years before it was declared that they were not going to observe the agreements, and once that happened, we had to attempt to use armed force to force them to observe those agreements. But we're not the ones to have started this war. The war started back in 2014 after the coup d'etat and the attempts at silence those who disagreed with the coup d'etat with the use of force, with the use of guns. Now, what did we do afterwards? So it took us 8 years before we recognized our independence, and once we understood that the Minsk agreements were never going to be implemented, please pay attention to that, we recognized the independence of these self-proclaimed republics. Could we do it from the point of view of international law? As Article 1 of the UN Charter states, we could do that because that amounts to the right of people to self-determination. And the ICJ made a ruling, in written form, which states that if a certain territory of a certain country decides to become independent, it does not have to apply to higher institutions of the said country. And that is what happened in Kosovo. So there is a ruling by the ICJ which says that if a territory decides to become independent, it is not to have to ask for permission from the capital in order for this right to self-determination to be implemented. And if that is the case, if that is what is stated in the ICJ ruling, then those self-proclaimed republics, which back then were not recognized, they were fully entitled to do that, which they did. And what about us? Were we entitled to recognize those republics? Yes, we were, and that is what we did. Then we entered into a treaty with them. Did we have that opportunity, that right to do that? Yes. And that treaty stipulated provision of aid to those republics in case of aggression. And Kyiv was pursuing a war against these countries which it had taken us 8 years to recognize. Did we have that right? Yes, we did. And then, in compliance with Article 51 of the UN Charter, we started to provide our assistance to them. Whatever anyone here says, I told exactly the same things to Secretary General Guterres. I explained the rationale to him. Where is the error? Where is the violation of international law here? There are none. From the point of view of international law, the response is, you attacked anyway. We did not attack. We were defending ourselves, and everyone needs to understand that. And the first step towards the war was made by those who had encouraged the bloody coup d'etat which ran afoul